Thank you so much, Charlie. It's great to be here. As I said, it's a little bit of a chilly morning, but it is a sunny morning, and I'm looking forward to telling everyone everything about the Yukon. Now, of course, it's been a bit of a challenging time for the world and especially our industry. We've had, COVID-19, this unexpected crisis occur, and it's something that as an industry and as a society we're all getting through, which is good. We've seen Australia, improve, and also, with Canada, not quite at the stage of Australia yet in terms of its COVID cases, but I have been checking every day, and there's a downward trend, which has been really encouraging. I think, especially for all of us in the tourism industry, we want everyone to be healthy and safe. But also, of course, we want people traveling again. And I know that just speaking to my friends and family and things, people are bursting to get traveling again. So looking forward for that to happen soon. And that's how I'm going to approach this presentation. Focus on when travel is ready to be taken again, people coming to the Yukon, and these are the type of things that they can experience. So without further ado, I'll get started. So you can see here from the main screen, Yukon larger than life. And we say that is because the Yukon is a very large territory. It is Canada's most northwestern territory, right high up near the Arctic Circle, next to Alaska. The prime gateway is Vancouver, though there are connections from other cities, and it's quite convenient from Vancouver. It's only 2.2-hour flight, and there's daily flights depending on the season. 15-hour flight from Australia to Vancouver, and then the 2 hours to the gateway of the Yukon, which is Whitehorse. We do find that most Australians who visit the Yukon do that as part of a broader Canada itinerary. So, if you're traveling to Canada for a couple of weeks, then it's definitely worthwhile, or a couple of weeks or more, definitely worthwhile, I think, to put the Yukon on probably 5, 6, 7 days of your itinerary. Is a really amazing thing to do, and you can see a lot in that time. But let's go through the type of things you can see and do in the Yukon. Here's also just another map here, which will give you, orientate you a little bit. As I said, Whitehorse is the gateway city. Another really major areas for experiences is Dawson City, where people fly there for an hour and 10 minutes, or they driving, especially during the summertime. The Yukon is an amazing self-drive experience, especially in the summertime. Winter, it's obviously a lot more of a serious undertaking because it is winter with the snow and the ice and so forth, and we don't recommend travelers doing that unless they are very experienced. But during the summertime, it's absolutely gorgeous. And the sights you can see along the way, the communities you can visit, the wildlife you can see is really fantastic. Whitehorse to Carcross. Carcross, of course, is well known for its beautiful Emerald Lake, which is down there. Some really nice interpretive centres, and of course the gateway as well to the railway that heads down into Alaska. Kluane National Park as well, an hour and 30 minutes drive. So lots of amazing opportunities there. Whitehorse, the gateway city, population of 28,000. It's where majority of the hotels are located. Some really fantastic lodges that are in the city surrounds. They say it's the wilderness city, and it does have a reasonably large population, but it does feel like a country town. Everyone's super friendly there. There's some great little coffee shops. It's a good place to hang out and see different things, and it really is a base for a lot of the activities, and a lot of the operators will pick up from hotels and also from cabins to take you to see the Northern Lights viewing, or the canoeing, or fishing, or hiking, or some of the cultural experiences we have, lots of different things. So Whitehorse is an ideal base for the Yukon. Just a few more little activities that we have in downtown Whitehorse. Aurora viewing, of course, one of the major draw cards of the Yukon, late August to mid-April. If you are visiting the Yukon particularly for aurora viewing, we do recommend at least 3 to 4 nights because aurora is not guaranteed. You can be very lucky and see it every night, or you can be less lucky and see it once. It really just depends on nature and what it wants to do, what the cloud cover's like, and so forth. And also just prepare your clients as well that it is a late night. Tours typically start at 10 p.m. and we'll finish at around 2 a.m. We have viewing sites which are specifically built. They're about 20 minutes from town, so the hotel transfers will happen and take you to the viewing sites. You'll get clothing which you'll have to hire in advance, or your clients will have to hire in advance. Because even though there's heated yurts and heated teepees and cabins and things like that, still you'll be going out there, your clients will be going out there and seeing the lights, and sometimes it's minus 20 out there during the winter, so you need to have the winter clothing. And we do have various outfitters who hire clothing, special winter clothing that you can be fine in minus 20 Celsius conditions for usually about 15 minutes or so. Then it starts to get a bit chilly, and then what everyone does is then they hop back into the heated cabin or the heated yurts, and have a hot chocolate or have a tea, or have some snacks which are provided complimentary as part of the viewing package. And then they head out again and do some more light viewing. So it works really well that way. Our accommodations in the Yukon, we have 3-star hotels, which are actually really nice 3-star hotels. We have a new Raven Inn, which is brand new. It's just been opened this year. And that's the first 4-star hotel in Whitehorse, which is really excited about. We also have a lot of wilderness lodges and cabins, which are about 3 to 4 star. Some of the lodges you could almost say are sort of 5-star, but of course they don't have extended facilities and things like that you might find in larger hotels. But they are presented extremely nicely, and so we do say they're kind of a luxury cabin option. We have all different types of options, from, as I said, 3-star cabins right up until the luxurious cabins. Hostels, and also camping as well. As I said, a lot of people are now getting into self-drive, and so the self-drive with motorhomes, or even just pitching a tent in the summer in our campgrounds is quite an interesting way of doing things. As I already mentioned, the lodge stays there. Lots of great options. Various city tour packages, as I went into a little while ago. But some of the highlights, of course, is Takini Hot Springs, the Yukon Wildlife Preserve, Yukon Brewing, some great brewery tours there. Various different types of outdoor adventures, canoeing, fishing, lots of different things you can do. In the wintertime, dog sledding, or in the Yukon they call it dog mushing, is one of my favorite activities. And I think they're actually going through Fish Lake at the moment, as you can see on that photograph there. And it's just fantastic. It's a really enjoyable way of experiencing the Yukon. And it feels super authentic as well. You're on the dog sled, and usually I'd recommend buying a nice cool little furry hat or a toque, which is kind of like a beanie, as the Canadians call it. And yeah, it just feels super authentic. And quite often, the guide will stop, and you'll light a fire and have some coffee, and you're surrounded by snow and mountains. It's a very cool experience. Also, snowmobiling is also a really great way of seeing the Yukon. And again, they light the fire. They'll usually cook some sausages and other types of food on the fire there. It's a real authentic wilderness experience. It's very cool. Snowshoeing, of course, as well. Another great shot of the snowmobile there. And there I am, actually doing some snowshoeing with actually some travel agents from Australia. That was a good fun time. Another shot of the ice fishing there. Takini Hot Springs is a really fun experience. It's hot springs, of course. In the wintertime, you can imagine it's, minus 10 degrees during the day, and you're in this beautiful warm water. I think it's, I can't remember the exact temperature, but it seems like 30, around 30 degrees, something like that, maybe 35 degrees. So it's really, really nice and warm. And they also have a hair freezing competition in, I think it's February. And it's quite fun because obviously it's very cold, the outside air temperature. So if you wet your hair and then you put your hair above the water, it will start to freeze. And you can create all these cool, different shapes and so forth. And they have a competition, as I said, in February about that. But don't worry that your hair doesn't freeze permanently. If you just dunk it back into the water, it'll go soft again. So yeah, you can create the creations, but don't fear that your hair will be permanently like you can see that photograph. The Yukon Wildlife Preserve, which is also close to Whitehorse. Fantastic to see all the Canadian animals, including my favourite animal, which is the bison, which is you can see on the right-hand side. It's kind of like actually a cow, but it's I call it a hardcore wilderness cow because it's definitely set up for the conditions there. And some of these photos are not professional, by the way. Some of them I just took myself, like that bison photograph I did take myself. So these are the type of things that you can see and get really close to the animals in the Yukon. Glass blowing at Lumen Studios is also a really fun way of just, I guess, mixing with the locals. It's all community members who run these places, and they have great stories to tell. And like, it feels really cool to be able to create a glass object. You put the tube into the glass beads, and then you put it into the big fire, and it melts all the glass. It's really cool, and they wrap it up, and you can take it home as a memento. It's a really cool experience. Various other different activities in the Yukon. There's the McBride Museum, which I definitely recommend checking out. We have amazing food in the Yukon as well. People don't really so much expect it because it's a relatively small place, but a lot of chefs actually have visited the Yukon, fallen in love with the place, and decided to be there permanently. So it's they've opened up their own restaurant. Yukon winters. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it does get pretty cold in the Yukon in winter. Can be minus 35 degrees. That can be during the day, but more typically at night. We do have the winter clothing rentals, which I said thoroughly recommend. If you have clients or yourselves are going there, hire the winter clothing. It's recommended. Don't just try and bring stuff from Australia because you'll find that it won't be sufficient. Things that will be fine in the ski fields in Australia won't be sufficient in the Yukon. The other thing to keep reminding of is the sunlight as well. December sunlight, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you'll find that, it's kind of like twilight at 4 p.m. and 10 a.m. as well, 11 a.m. It still seems like twilight. So it's quite an interesting way of actually viewing the world, or the Yukon at least, during those winter times with the sunlight. It's in a different position. Of course, the summer is completely different, and we call it the land of the midnight sun because during this summer, particularly during the solstice, which is the very high point of summer in June, we have 24 hours of daylight. And I do remember actually going to Diamond Tooth Gertie's Casino in Dawson City, where they have various cabaret shows and so forth. And the last show was at midnight. And we had a great time there. And we left at about, I think, 1 a.m. And it was broad daylight when we came out. And it was very surreal, but a very memorable experience and good times. So, yeah, it's just shows to show that you can visit the Yukon once, but then visit again. And literally, it's a totally different experience with the summer versus winter. And it can get hot in there as well, 35 degrees. Yukon summers, as I mentioned, extremely beautiful scenery, time to go hiking, canoeing, camping, fishing, and so forth. There's a shot of Emerald Lake there. Just some extra shots there. So fishing, so the Yukon River, so the third longest river in North America. Flight seeing very, very popular, winter and summer. It's a great way to experience the Yukon because the Yukon's such a vast place. There's, of course, for flying fishing trips as well. Mentioned a little bit about the wildlife before. Humans are in the minority in the Yukon. 35,000 people, but look, as you can see there on the screen, just how many different species of animals and birds and so forth there are. Of course, the grizzly bear as well, one of the most famous characters of Canada. Don't want to get too close to the grizzly. Various deer. And now moving on a little bit to beyond Whitehorse. Dawson City, Carcross, Kluane National Park and beyond. Day trip there, this is the Emerald Lake, you can see there. Really quite amazing lake with its aqua colour. Carcross, 40 minutes south of Whitehorse. It's also the gateway to the historic White Pass and Yukon route train, which I would thoroughly recommend yourselves or your clients doing. It's fantastic. It goes through the amazing mountains, and it's actually a historical route as well. If you've seen the Call of the Wild film, which was recently released with Harrison Ford, it talks about the Klondike Gold Rush. This train takes you through the route that the miners and they call them stampeders actually took to get to the Yukon, to get to Dawson City. So it's very historical, and it's really fantastic, and it takes you all the way through to Skagway, Alaska, and you can see there are a couple of shots of what the train is like. So it's a historical train as well. It's really quite fantastic. Kluane National Park, about an hour and a half drive from Whitehorse. Really fantastic way of just viewing these amazing mountainscapes. And of course, we have hiking trails, rafting, fishing, lots of different things to do there. Flight seeing, I mentioned a little bit further earlier on, is one of the best ways to see Kluane National Park, including Mount Logan, which is the tallest mountain in Canada. This is another great shot there of the flight seeing tours by fixed wing aircraft. One thing to keep in mind is if your clients do have get seasick, or they get I guess flight sick, they are in a small plane. So just remind them that if they do need some medication, it is definitely recommended, because some people do experience the air sickness. But usually, if you're looking at the scenery, it's pretty minimal. It's just when you actually stare down at the plane itself, you tend to have a few issues. Self-drive, as I said earlier, really popular way of experiencing the Yukon. And why wouldn't you? Because if you look at some of those scenes, especially in fall, when you have the fall colours, really makes things stand out. We do have in the Yukon a number of itineraries which you'll find on our website. One of the itineraries here is the Golden Circle route. Incorporates Whitehorse, Carcross, Kluane, Haines Junction, even takes you down to Skagway, Alaska. And it's really interesting way of just seeing different things the Yukon do have to offer. Dawson City there, another a really amazing drive itinerary, but also flying there as well as possible. And that is really the heart of the Klondike Gold Rush. Over 100,000 people headed to the Yukon during the Gold Rush. And as I mentioned, the Call of the Wild film starring Harrison Ford, which was recently released in cinemas, and I think it's now available on Disney Plus for download as well. You can actually get a good introduction to what the Gold Rush period was like, and what it was like in Dawson City. And if you go to anywhere in the Yukon, go to Dawson City. It's an amazing place. It's literally like you step back into an old West town. It's really fantastic. It's just the downtown hotel. I actually stayed in the downtown hotel. It's a really authentic property. As you can see there, the streets are all dirt, which is again just adds to the authentic feel. Some of the streets there. And of course, the Yukon, in particular Dawson City, is built on permafrost. And in the old days, the people used to find that when the summer would happen, some of the permafrost would melt and the houses used to sink. And they didn't have the building techniques back then to actually deal with that. So you'll see some of the houses in Dawson City actually are on a severe tilt because of that. And it's just great to be able to walk through and do the guided walking tours and so forth. As I mentioned before, Diamond Tooth Gertie's Casino is one of the oldest casinos in Canada, and it's fantastic for various cabaret shows, musicals, and it's really fun for the whole family. It's not your typical kind of casino like you'd find in cities. It's kind of like a very authentic Wild West type experience. Various gold mining sites, you can pan for gold, see some of the big dredges they used in the latter part of the gold mining era. And of course, gold mining is still going on in the Yukon, but not to the stage of the way it was. Tombstone Territorial Park is one of the highlights of the Yukon. An hour and a half drive from Dawson City. You can see there's some of the amazing vistas you can see. Flight seeing or via hiking or taking some road trips or a tour are the ways to see Tombstone Territorial Park. There's some of the fall colours there. Really quite spectacular. Dempster Highway will take you up to the Arctic Circle, which is quite amazing. And some of these other itineraries and specialty self-drive itineraries, which you can see up on the website. And as I said, during the summer and autumn periods, these are really fine for Australians to go and experience all this type of thing via self-drive. Or there's various tours you can do. And during the winter time, it is more of a serious experience, of course, because of the cold. This is just some of the vistas you'll see driving along our Yukon highways. We say highways, but of course, they're quite often dirt roads, or just, lightly sealed. Okay, so just, I guess to summarize a little bit, Aurora viewing period is late August to April. You'll find our winter snow activities December to April, and it is important to consider when snow falls, because while sometimes you'll get a fall in mid-November or even earlier, we usually say that snow activities, such as your dog sledding and so forth, are better from December. Particularly because we tend to use a lot of the lakes, and we want to make sure the lakes are frozen completely before we allow people to go onto them for dog sledding or snowmobiling and so forth. Klondike Gold Rush, which I just came into. Also the First Nations culture, which I haven't really gone into, but definitely worthwhile to think more about. It's really fantastic because you just hear about the history. And on the way actually to Kluane National Park, there's an interpretive centre where you can see some amazing ways that the First Nations people used to live and still live today, and various ways they used to cook, and just a lot about their history. It's very worthwhile. As you can see, there are many different options in terms of regions, tours, and so forth. Well, that's just about it for me. I wasn't sure how I was going to go for time, but I think that's not too bad. 23 minutes in. I was told 20 minutes, so 23 is not too bad. I'm not sure if Charlie is back with us yet, but now is probably the opportunity for any questions. If you do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, and we will endeavour to answer.
Thank you, Sean. Yes. The floor is open for questions. You can either type those into the chat box or into the Q&A box, whichever you get to first is all good. Thank you, Sean. I mean, the Yukon is just an absolutely fascinating destination. Definitely on my bucket list. I'm sure it's on a few people's bucket list. Just unique scenery, unique